My homies, HATEISAVIRUS, shouts to them, shouts to everybody on that team. It's a movement against, you know what I'm saying, hatred in society. And we all know that right now, what's up, Blingy? What's up, JK Pop? We all know that there's a lot going on in society right now, definitely for the Asian American community. My whole community, my whole racial community, we've been thinking and talking a lot about race and racism. Obviously we know, what's up, Angela, Leo, we know that it's a bigger struggle. We know that Black Lives Matter is, something that some of us have been following and saying for 5+ years. But a lot of us also, are maybe a little newer to the movement. So we definitely are trying to jump in and speak on all those types of situations. So thank you all for coming through. That's right. Hashtag hate is a virus. Hey, what's up, Alan? What's up, Matt? Camila, thank you for coming through. So basically, yeah, let me see. All right, here we go. Virus, the whole squad. We're going to chop it up again. Thanks, everyone, for joining in. I haven't met Pilo. I have met some of his team. I know that he's staying down in LA now, so shouts to him. What's up, Sam? How you doing, bro?
Yeah, really weird that it wasn't working when I was trying to do it, but for whatever reason, this is working. Can you hear me good?
Yeah, you sound great, man. You sound great.
All right, cool. I'm sweating a little bit because I was, I'm not a tech guy, so trying to figure all this out is not my forte. I apologize.
Word. Yeah, Camila, welcome from Brazil. Yeah, so this is my boy Sam. Like I said, he and I are both part of the Hate is a Virus campaign. So yeah, y'all, please, we're gonna have just like a real in-depth chat right here, trying to break down a lot of it. So yeah, Sam, why don't you introduce yourself and kind of the purpose of these Real Talk Tuesdays joints?
For sure, and I appreciate for you taking the mantle of what I'm supposed to be doing. So thank you, brother. So I'm Sam Hyun. I'm one of the Asian American commissioners here in Massachusetts. I'm also do a lot of different work, a lot of activism. I used to work for the Speaker of the House here in Massachusetts for 5 years, so I kind of have both that kind of insider-outsider background. But here with Hate is Virus, every other Tuesday we try to have somebody on from the community that knows, that is part of the fight, the good fight. And Jason happens to be one of those dudes, not just as an artist, but also in the way that he also advocates and has been doing this work on the grassroots level for a long time. And so we are super stoked and super excited to have Jason, as this is leading up to our Raise a Million campaign at the end of the month. So for those of you, I will be making an announcement on that towards the end of this live. However, I did want to get right into it with Jason. Jason, did you already get to introduce yourself to everybody?
Yeah, so I know a lot of my followers are on this live stream. Thanks for joining in. For those who don't know me, my name is Jason Chu. I'm a rapper, I'm a poet, and I'm an activist. I've been mentored into activism for sort of my career. So definitely everything I do, try to have positive social impact. Try to really dig into sort of the structures of what's going on, right? I think a lot of us care, and a lot of us know that society's fucked up right now. But for me, a lot of what goes from being just informed to being an activist is when you're really trying to understand why and how this shit happens. What's up, Melly Bean? So that is essentially what I do, and I'm so stoked to be here with Sam. It's one of the homies, and we're both representing that Hate is a Virus campaign.
Yeah, it sucked because when I started this, I had this whole elaborate plan all out. I was gonna play some of your music. I was gonna play Honor. I've been listening to that song a lot. And so I think right now is really timely, considering, having someone who is an artist, a rapper, an activist. Given this weekend, I kind of wanted to start there before we got everywhere else. There was a rally in Belsonhurst, Brooklyn, that was put together by China Mac in support of an 89-year-old Chinese-American woman, elderly woman who was attacked, assaulted, and these two cowards tried to light her on fire with kerosene, right? So this was a premeditated attack for sure, but isn't being treated as a hate crime. So, Jason, what are your thoughts on that? What are your thoughts on, the movement that China Mac started? Hello, what's up, Kimmy? Thank you for joining. Kimmy Yam has joined us. So much love to you. Thank you for joining, my friend. So yeah, I just want to start off with that.
No, I love it, man, because a lot, literally I was on the phone with my boy, Kev, my boy Tenwa, that's my right hand dude. And I was saying, it's so funny because that Saturday morning I was out, we were in Leimert Park, we were in Crenshaw, a bunch of Asian Americans stepping out to support Black Lives Matter. And so I think that I love it because, you know, I was here in Cali, in LA, you know, on the Beast Coast, on the best coast, you know, doing what we do. And then y'all there on the Beast Coast, you know what I'm saying? Like killing it. And I love, love, love that a lot of our homies, you know, people like China Mac, people like MC Jin, people like Bohan Phoenix, people like my boy Jamel Mims, people like yourself, you know, we're stepping out and we're really saying that Asian America is not silent. You know what I'm saying? I think there's a lot of people who talk about how Asian Americans learn a lot from Black culture. Oh, but they don't really speak up, blah, 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 blah. And so that's, I think, why we really wanted to put together this live stream, right? To sort of talk about how our community has really, really, really been stepping up and speaking out, not just in the last year. Really, for a long time, there have been voices in our community that step out and speak up. But a lot of that history of activism, of speaking up, of having voices has been erased, right? This isn't even passive, right? It's not even like they've been forgotten. It's that they've been actively erased for certain reasons. So I look at, you know, that march that happened in Bensonhurst. I look at our vigil, our rally that we were holding in Leimert Park, which everybody knows is sort of like, you know, the heart of Black culture, you know, in South Central. And, you know, I think that it's such a great time as Asian Americans to be reclaiming our history, to be reclaiming the legacy of people stepping out and speaking up as people of color.
For sure. I think, you know, one of the things that I learned recently was that, you know, Malcolm X died in Yuri Kochiyama's hands. Like, people don't know that. And when I was watching Spike Lee's adaptation of Malcolm X's life, he doesn't portray that. Like, at no point does he ever talk about Yuri Kochiyama. And I'm not saying that Spike Lee was intentionally trying to erase history, but more the fact that that's not taught. That's not something that's talked about. Malcolm X's legacy or much of the civil rights movement is the role of Asian Americans. But, you know, but how do we talk about that, right? So it's like, you know, that's something that's a really complicated conversation where, you know, that there are many Asian Americans who have spoke up, and that's part of our history. For instance, when we had Kathy Masayoka on a couple weeks ago, she's been fighting this good fight for a long, long time. But what do you say to the other communities or Asian Americans who believe that Asian Americans are silent, right? Like, for a long time, I also carried out that narrative that, oh, we're all silent, we don't say enough, we need to speak up. What would you say to people who say that?
Yeah, I mean, for me, what I'd say is, like, we got to know our history. You know what I'm saying? And that's one thing that I love, definitely as, you know, a person of color, definitely as a young man growing up, listening to hip hop, right? Listening to Black and brown voices. What is super, super crucial and critical in those communities is that there's people, right, who keep talking about history and heritage. So, you know what I'm saying? Like, hip hop keeps alive names, you know, like names of artists, but also names of really crucial key figures, right? I heard about Huey P. Newton from hip hop before I learned about Huey P. Newton and the Black Panthers in school, right? Or I learned about, you know, Nat Turner. You know what I'm saying? I learned about all of the John Brown, right? Abolitionists, these key figures, actually from entertainment culture, from Black entertainment culture, before I learned about it in school or even in college. So I think that's so much for us, right? We talk a lot. There's a lot of conversation that goes on about Asian American entertainment and representation. But I think the question for me is always, what are we representing, right? Are we here being like, oh, because over and over and over again, right? What you hear is like, oh man, Asian American entertainment, we want to represent our heritage. And usually heritage, you know, we think about like, that's Korean, or that's Chinese, or that's Taiwanese, or that's, you know, Desi culture, or that's, you know, Malayan culture. But our Asian American heritage is also Yuri Kochiyama and Grace Lee Boggs. And you know what I'm saying? Like Mamie Tate, you know what I'm saying? Like somebody like Frank Wu, somebody like, you know, Korematsu, Fred Korematsu, right? So I think that so much of why we don't speak up and speak out is because we need our leaders, right? People such as yourself, people like someone like China Mac, people like someone like Bohan Phoenix, people like someone like MC Jin, you know, Ruby Ibarra, G. Yamazawa, myself, we're all have the opportunity. You know, everybody wants to sound like, yo, you know, man, I'm trailblazing. I'm the first one to ever say this. But I think that where we really need to get to as a culture is, you know what I'm saying? Like, and that's why you look at so much of Black entertainment, right? You look at like a YG, and YG will always say, yo, I'm not the first gangster rapper ever. You know, I'm not the first blood to ever rap. And he ties in this lineage. And we have this deep lineage that we need to acknowledge and celebrate. Because if we don't, we know damn sure that, you know, one thing that I discovered in my research is that, you know, most of the high school history textbook decisions are based on a particular district in Texas, right? And so if, you know, the mainstream history curriculums are actually all based on one particular school district. So we know that they're not going to be looking at particular other considerations. So it's up to us, I think, to really foster in our community this communal memory, not just of Asia, but of Asian America, right? 150 years of Asian America, which includes Asian American activism.
Right. Yeah, and also, like, can we, you know, just dive into the fact that you had, you know, 100, 120, 150 years of Asian American history. That's how long we've been here in this country. But then there's also a long period in which Asian Americans were banned from immigrating to this country. So for a vast majority of the population that's here now, our history here is really only 55 years old. So can we get into why is it hard for, you know, Asian Americans to identify as Asian Americans? Why is it that we don't? And then even when we do, why is it so hard for us to seemingly embrace, or I would say not embrace, but acknowledge the fact that we have issues in our community, that we have issues like anti-Blackness, that we have issues of leaning into and supporting and uplifting white supremacy, but also, like, you know, I guess we want to address that and we can get into how we can get away from that.
Yeah, I love, and you know, I love, man, I love it because I feel like we could literally have this same conversation in reverse. Because I feel like you're feeding me a lot of stuff, but you know the answer. You know what I'm saying? I love this. Because you know that where I'm going to go is the birth of the notion of Asian America, right, in 1969 with Emma G. and Yuji Ichioka. So this whole, so for those of you who are tuned in who don't necessarily don't know this history, at the end of the 60s, there was this movement called the Third World Liberation Front. And basically, it was people of different heritages, a lot of Asians, a lot of Black folks, Latinx folks, and Native folks and Pacific Islanders. Everyone was banding together saying, look, we're all considered having our roots in, you know, what was known as the Third World, right? And so these undeveloped countries, or these countries outside of basically Europe and North America, all of our peoples in America are doing poorly. You know, all of our peoples are being oppressed, are being excluded. And so what we're going to do is band together for representation, band together so that our voices and our history can be heard and taught. And so in the midst of that movement, that was actually where the phrase Asian American came about. So it wasn't like white folks were calling us Asians in America. You know, even white folks were like, okay, was that?
Or
Right. At most, they'd be like, "Oh, the Orientals," but you know, they definitely didn't include the idea of Asians being American. And it was, you know, a Japanese American and a Chinese American scholars at Berkeley. They said, "Yo, we need an umbrella that we can all get together under and band together under." Because look, so it was never supposed to be like, "Look, we're all just Asian. We're the same." What it was really supposed to be was, we are all different. We all come from different, we all have different stories. We all have different legacies. But what we're going to do is we are going to join together and fight for each other's causes, right? Take up a common cause together. And so I think that one thing that's really changed my mind for the last, you know, while, has been realizing that Asian America is a self-chosen term. You know what I'm
Mhm.
saying? It's an alliance that we put on ourselves. It's a banner that we picked up so that we could care for everybody. It's a choice, right? But so the
Mhm.
problem is, we need to understand that by opting into this identity, we need to it puts a responsibility on us, right? It puts a responsibility on us to make sure that, like me as a Chinese American, do I understand, do I understand the plight of Korean Americans and Hmong Americans and Desi Americans
Mhm.
and, Southeast Asians, right? Do I understand the ways that America intervened in Vietnam and in South Korea and in Laos and Cambodia? And if I can, then I really can say I'm Asian American, right? Because then when I go
Right.
out, I can fight for the whole group. But we gotta put that on ourselves, you know?
For sure. I feel like there's a lot of us in our community who they didn't come to this country understand, my parents, when they came here, they didn't understand the term Asian American. And then when it's that label is put onto you, it becomes part of your identity. For most people, when they think about identity comes from a place of pride and self-value and self-worth. And I think that a lot of people have a hard time grappling with the fact that when you take on that mantle of being Asian American, that label identity of being Asian American, that means that you also have to encompass all that, the good and the bad. And I think that right now in our community, because we've been just basically trying to set our roots here, 55 years is not a long time. You're trying to set your roots here, trying to survive that, and that you've never really, trying to learn the language, and haven't fully even grappled and came to understand what race and racism is, right? So can we also talk about, like, in Asian countries, that the concept of race is a really new idea that they've come to really try to start understand while they come to the United States.
Yeah, man. I think that's super true. Like yeah, you touched on it before, you brought it up, and I agree that, like, there is a lot of anti-blackness in, a lot of Asian American communities, a lot of Asian communities. Now, some of that we can put at the feet of American cultural hegemony, right? I would say, right, you watch so many movies that portray black folks as gangsters, or portray black folk, like, every time you watch a movie, right, there's that.
Mhm.
But that's a great point, Asia Worcester, and some other folks who are in the chat. Like, I think it would be disingenuous to say, oh, it's just Western white colonialism. Like, there is also latent colorism and
Yep.
discrimination in a lot of
Yep.
Asian societies. You look at, you even look at, China, Singapore, Malaysia, South Korea, right? There's a lot of racism against Filipino immigrants. There's a lot of racism against darker skinned South and Southeast Asian immigrants. And so I think that we do have to look, to a certain degree. I think it's helpful to say, what is it in our heritage cultures that plays into anti-blackness?
Mhm.
And then I think that there is also definitely uh, a degree to which we can say, culture and heritage is a choice, right? It's a
Mhm.
choice about the stories that we tell about what it means to be Chinese or what it means to be Korean American. Um, we get a choice to sort of refine our heritage in each generation. And, for me to point out that, for example, I know there was a point in the mid 1900s where Japan was actually very pro-black, or a lot of Japanese aligned themselves with the anti-segregationist causes of
Mhm.
black folks in America. Um, and so I think when we talk about, you know, Asian heritage and anti-blackness, we can acknowledge a real uh, gap there. There's a gap of ignorance, but I think that also racism often has less to do with ignorance and more to do with power. And
Mhm.
I think that one of the major issues is that our communities, broadly speaking, racially, are disenfranchised in America, right? And so, it is so much easier to point to the other person living in the hood next to you, right? Like it's so much easier. You look at the LA uprising, right? 1992, Taegu, right? And how Korean liquor stores were the targets of looting, right? Koreatown was the target of looting, but that's also because those were the areas we were allowed to occupy. Those were the places that were placed in proximity, right?
Mhm.
And so, of course, the wealthier zip codes, they weren't looted because police protected there. And it so happens that those wealthier zip codes were almost uniformly white, right?
Right.
So you can start looking at, asking, why is there so much tension between our communities? Then you also got to start asking, well, why is it that our communities are in these spaces or feel the need to have tension, right? Because I think about what AOC said, right? She was talking about defunding the police, right? And what AOC said was, we know what it looks like for police to be defunded. You just look at white suburbs, you look at these suburbs where police budgets are low and budgets for schools, budgets for after school programs, budgets for, community facilities are high.
Mhm.
And I can't help but think that part of where this narrative of, Asian Americans being anti-Black or anti-Latino comes from the fact that we're thrown into these under-resourced communities together, right? So many Southeast Asians, Vietnamese refugees, Cambodian, Hmong, Lao refugees arrived in America, and they were just resettled. They were just thrown with no community resources. They barely spoke English, and they were placed into the hood. And then, of course, the people that they're going to be around, the people that they're going to have tension with, are the other people who wind up in the hood,
Mhm. Yeah, no, I think part of it is too that we don't know Black history. We don't understand, the sacrifices the Black community have made and fought to ensure, for instance, like during the Civil Rights Movement, right? The Immigration Act had massive part to do with the Civil Rights Movement leaders advocating for, or in 1982 with Vincent Chin, doesn't get mainstream attention if Jesse Jackson doesn't fly in, right?
Mm-hmm.
And stand with the Asian community. And so I feel like that, in my opinion, is that there's a lot of misunderstanding, miscommunication. And I think that part of the miscommunication, misunderstanding lies in the fact that Asian Americans are seen as a monolith, that people don't understand our geopolitical differences and why is it that we can't build solidarity. So in your opinion, like what are some of the reasons for why we have such a hard time building solidarity within the Asian American community? Why is it that we still have so many differences and we can't seem to get on the same page?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question. To me, a lot of it just comes down to, I saw Angela in the comments was talking about microaggressions, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, there's so many pieces to the puzzle, right? So much of it is for us, second generation Asian Americans born here. Our Asian heritage, almost uniformly, very, very often, especially if you're not in a place like SoCal, like the Bay Area, being Asian is seen as a negative thing to be, right? Like you want to become more Americanized, right? Power in America, being normal in America, whether that's, getting with somebody romantically, it all lies in normalizing yourself. So of course you separate yourself from other people that you view as non-normal, And yeah, I love what DDS Tattered Wings just said. Like,
Dominique.
yeah. Hey,
Homie, Dominique.
that's the homie, like the homie dropping knowledge right there, because we are pitted against each other, and this is exactly why I think, it's another version of exactly what happened to us, between the Asian and Black and Brown communities, right? In the same way that wedges were driven between the Asian and Black communities in the 70s. And I've been doing a lot of reading on historical first and second hand sources, where they talk about how they could already see it happening during the Third World Liberation Front, they could already see the efforts from the outside to drive a wedge between Asian Americans and Black folks. And they were saying, this is what might happen. They were already saying, like, this is what's going to happen to our coalition.
Right.
And then and the same thing I think is true within Asian America, right? Because they see this bigger coalition building together, right? There's going to be efforts to drive that apart. And and I think that those fault lines have, if anything, been played on, right? Because if we don't understand the bigger picture of, hey, we need to gather together and we need to support everybody's fight, right? Which was why, like, in the 70s, Vietnam was such an issue. And, everyone from Japanese Americans to Black Americans to Latino Americans turned out saying, hey, we got to get on the side of Vietnamese folks because they're being trodden down. They're coming as refugees and they're kind of being shit on. But, it's been engineered now to where I think that sense of unity, that bigger sense of unity is lost, and it becomes very much every group for themselves. So then, Chinese folks say, oh, China is, we're proud to be Chinese American. And then wealthy Chinese say, we don't care about poor, third generation Toisanese, Hokkien, like, we don't care about that. We care about our group of Chinese. Right. And I think until we point out that there's something bigger going on, that there's a bigger community, a bigger narrative, a bigger goal, I think that, it really is true. Like, divided we fall, right. It's only when we're united that we can stand. But I think in order to understand that unity, we need movements like HATEISAVIRUS. We need uniters. We need, I see a lot of folks in the chat are talking about Obama, right? We need people who really, leaders who call us out and lift us up into this picture of what we can be together. Right. And so often we lack that, and it becomes about my group surviving, my community surviving, me as an individual surviving.
Yeah, that's a great segue into my next question, right? My next question was, well, how is it, for me, I'm with trying to get those in our community to understand how, because we see, like, people complaining about the Black Lives Matter and say, well, what about Asian lives, right? What about, there was a great podcast on Code Switch where they talked about, Edmund Hong, who's a 28-year-old chef, Korean-American chef, and he talks about his transition from being a conservative to someone who understands and now supports the Black Lives Matter movement. But when he was talking to his mom said, well, what about Asian lives? Like, what don't we matter? Like, so how do we get those in the Asian community to understand that the liberation of Black people is absolutely essential for the elevation of the Asian American community? I feel as though a lot of folks are really have this misunderstanding of why the Black Lives Matter movement is absolutely critical to the AAPI community. Yeah,
I mean, so I've got a spoken word piece that kind of touches on this. It's called APIs for Black Lives. And kind of, the way I see it, I mean, like really what it is we're fighting the same enemy, right? We're fighting the same enemy. We are fighting the enemy of oppression, right? And oppression does, and it breaks down in many ways, right? Of course, there's gendered oppression. There's oppression based on sexuality. I'm not saying that, every white person is doing great. I'm not saying that, every cisgendered man is doing great. But I do think that the way that oppression plays out on different communities and on different bodies is different, right? So, for example, right, if you are a white woman, there's certain shit that will definitely be prejudiced against you. But the way that plays out is different than if you are, for example, a Black woman or an Asian American woman, or if you're, an Asian American man, right? So I think it's so important to speak up and to stand behind and listen to the leadership of Black Lives Matter, because they are experts at the oppression that's held them down, right? For Black folks, it's their lives are being taken away, right? Whether that's systemic, the way that the healthcare system does not treat, does not diagnose, does not admit Black folks well, the way that, you know, police brutality, you look at incarceration rates, you look at the rates of police involved shootings, and the numbers skyrocket for Black folks. So it's so important for us to support their struggle, because our struggle's against a common enemy, right? And that common enemy is white supremacy, is you know, marginalization, is the power structure that denies power to certain groups and reserves power for others. So in the same way, right, that like you alluded to, in the 70s, Black civil rights leaders spoke up on Vietnam, right? They spoke up against the use of American military and the war crimes that occurred there against Vietnamese civilians.
He literally over it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. So because Black civil rights leaders understood that it was the struggle against the same power. Now, that struggle played itself out as imperialism in East and Southeast Asia. That struggle played itself out as denial of votes and denial of, you know, services and police brutality to Black Americans. And then now, you know, I think we see the same power structure being foisted on Asian Americans, where, you know, we see Cambodian and Vietnamese and Lao Americans being deported, right? Folks who were supposed to be guaranteed safety in America because they fought, they worked on behalf of American interests. Now they're just being kicked back to Southeast Asia, a place that, you know, they left when they were 2-3 years old. You know, their family was brought over. So I think that when we see the bigger picture, then we understand how, you know, very famously, right, this group of Polynesian activist women, right, said, your liberation is bound up in mine. That's how we move forward, when we understand. So the truth is, right, if Black Lives Matter gets their policy agenda advanced, if, you know, over-policing goes down, if community services gets funded, then Asian Americans will also have our seat at the table and share in that, right? There's gonna be more funding. There's gonna be more available at the table for everyone, right? Because it's not just Black communities get over-policed, but it's not just Black communities whose community services are suffering because so much money is being diverted to policing. That's also Asian American communities, right? So if we're worried about our grandparents and our aunties and our uncles and our parents not being given, you know, health services, not being given translation services when it's their time to vote, not being given translation services for, you know, ballot measures that affect the funding to their community centers, that's all going to improve in this broader push to justice, right? A rising tide carries all ships. So we got to throw our support behind our Black brothers and sisters and their cause, understanding that, you know, as justice and as equality advances, then that justice and equality for all, you know?
Right. And I feel like, you know, oftentimes the ones I hear saying that are the East Asian, lighter skinned Asians who say that because the Southeast Asian, South Asian, those parts of our community, they have very different relationships with the police. Like here in Lowell, in Massachusetts, we have the second highest Cambodian community in the country. And there was a study done 20 years ago that asked them, what are the two main policy issues that you want people, the government to address? And number one on the list was their relationship with police, the way that they get treated. And if you talk to a lot of folks who are from the Indian community or Desis, right? Like they get pulled over all the time and have very negative relationships with law enforcement. And I feel like because we're not a monolith, we're not homogeneous, we're incredibly diverse. part of that is the reason why we have such a hard time understanding one another, because we see it just from the lens of our own identity, which we don't all identify as one another. We lean into and say we're Asian American when it benefits us, and oftentimes when it doesn't, we will say that we're not, and we say, oh, I'm Chinese, or I'm Korean, or I'm not Cambodian. And I think we have to have these conversations where we call that shit out and say that's unacceptable. You can't just lean in and say I'm Asian American when it benefits. Just banish like it, like Ghostbusters when shit gets hard.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's often the criticism of the Asian American community is, we will rally when it plays to our community, right? But oftentimes when it doesn't, there is some degree of lacking. That isn't to say that there hasn't been Asian Americans who have spoken up and been fighting the good fight for a long time. We have amazing activists in our community, and we damn sure know how to rally, right? When we have to, but it's like we need to bring that same energy 24/7 for all communities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I love what you're saying. And I think, and this is why I think right now is such a great time. Like I'm seeing everybody posting in the chat, almost having like a parallel conversation to us. And it's so dope because I'm seeing, folks who look like, they might be Asian, they may be Black folks. There's a pretty diverse group of people in the chat. And we all really care about this right now because I think, America is at such a crisis point. America as a whole is at such a crisis point that we know we really have to take care of each other. And that's one thing that's super powerful right now is that, I think that in a way that I haven't really seen in my lifetime, and we're about the same age. So I think, probably in our lifetimes, we haven't seen this. And really even reading back as a student of Asian American and activist history, it's really hasn't been since the late 60s, early 70s that there's been so much public unity. Now, there's also a lot of, disunity, and that was always there too. But I think right now there's so many people who want to stand up and speak out. And I know that there's a lot of folks who don't necessarily, there's a lot of Asian folks who feel like other communities may not necessarily have their backs. But even just the fact that we've got such a diverse group in this chat following along, caring about this conversation is really incredible to me. And I think, vice versa, 15 years ago, if you were Asian American and you liked hip hop, right, you would be seen as trying to be Black, right? Or you would be called like, oh, you're just trying to, follow along with this trend. You're trying to fit in, right? You'd be seen as being less Asian American because because you're a rapper or you're a poet. But I think now we're at a place culturally where people have a more nuanced understanding of the ways communities can build in with each other, right? And it's not like, oh, you watch anime, you're trying to be Asian, or you love, I don't know, like K-pop, you're trying to be Asian, or, oh, you like rap and, you dress like streetwear, so you must be trying to be Black. I think there's more of a nuanced understanding of how we can be polycultural, right? How we can influence each other. We can receive influence from each other, and then how we can be responsible with the influences we've received.
Right. So my next question, we're going to get a little bit controversial here. So my question is, what about, right now for a lot of Asian American folks, a lot of people in the community, maybe like a lot of the terminology or activism is new to their consciousness, right? Like they didn't have the language for it. Now they're really getting informed and getting aware. And so oftentimes it can feel very performative.
Mm-hmm.
It can feel as if you're going through the motions, or they're maybe not using the terms right. Maybe, they don't fully know the history, but, oftentimes the recently converted happen to be the most pious, which for then OGs, people who have been doing this work for a long time, start getting pretty annoyed. And so how do we deal with that, where you want to continue to encourage people who are maybe, even if their intention is pure, but their impact is performative, right? But to show them the right path and educate them, but also like not totally invalidate the people who feel annoyed, but also, kind of get them to understand that we need to give people time, because knowledge and our experience is not like a USB drive that you can just input into somebody else.
Yeah, man. So like I said, for me, I've been very, very blessed to be mentored into my activism. You know what I'm saying? I think that is super crucial. Is activism cannot be ideas that you picked up in a vacuum, right? Because then you don't know how to live it out, right? And this is something that I do see in the current moment. People getting very passionate, which is amazing. But then the issue becomes we're speaking up and we're getting loud, but this might be our first time at the rodeo, you know? And so like I will say this, speaking of controversy, I will say I fully believe in canceling people and organizations, but it's supposed to be used strategically. Right. And so
that was my next question.
right. So because what I mean by this, for everyone in the chat who's listening in, what I mean is cancellation is a tool. It's a tool of punishment and discipline and redirection and hopefully moving towards a better societal norm. Right. So if we are canceling, which is to say, right, because this is, the Montgomery bus boycott wasn't nothing but a cancellation, right? The Boston Tea Party, shouts to Boston, shouts to Beantown, like that was nothing but like a cancellation, right? But those were all actions taken with a particular goal in mind, a particular target on deck, and all of it was done not just to vent anger, but to create change. And I think that the major issue is right now, I think there's a lot of cancellation that's happening, that instead of saying, hey, we've got this goal in mind, we want Chase Bank to divest from private prisons. We want, 3M to stop manufacturing police riot shields, just as like, I don't know if that's even true, but you're right. That's the kind of goal that I'm talking about. Instead of saying,
for example.
Exactly, right? Like we need this kind of renewal. But instead of that, we'll take, it's become, I think, a form of tabloid entertainment, right? Yo, can you guess what A-list celebrity said this? Or, hey, what hot restaurant owner is anti-Black? And instead of being focused on the outcome of the cancellation, the outcome of the protest, we're focused on the substance of it, right? We're just like, yo, do you feel angry about society? Do you feel angry about anti-Asian or anti-Black racism or any kind of whatever? Then yo, let's go after this person. And so and I think that's where we need to. That's going back to the original question. That's where my activism comes from, is being mentored into it by people who've done this for 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And so when you learn from someone like, I know Michelle from HATEISAVIRUS, one of her big OGs.
Shout out Michelle.
Yeah, shouts to Michelle, right? Mike Murase, right? Who was huge in Asian American activism in the 70s. Or for me, it's my OG, Diane Uchie, who's one of Mike's OG friends. And so I think that it's so important for us to learn at the feet of people who've done this for a generation, because they can tell us like, look, in the 70s, we fucked up this way, or this was some shit that worked for us. Hey, Michelle, what's up? This is some shit that worked for us in the 80s. And then I think when we have these OGs, people who are 50, 60, 70 years old, when they can give us the knowledge, when we can run our shit by them, like, yo, this went down, how do you think we should respond to it? That lets our activism be changed up so much, versus if it's just a bunch of young, angry people. Like, we need the anger and the energy of youth, but if all we have is anger and energy, and we don't have anybody with a level head who's lived through this before, then there's just so much friendly fire, right? So to me, to anyone listening, I'd say, if if you want to deepen your activism, if you want to become a lifelong activist, rather than just every time it goes viral on social media, you're like, yo, this is fucked up, let me get involved, right? If we want to evolve sustainable, lifelong activism, go out, go to a Black Lives Matter meeting and find the OGs who are, 50, 60. These people will often be found fighting homelessness and poverty. They'll often be found in organizations like, for Asian Americans, it's JACL or OCA, or, just these, there's activist organizations. If you're looking for someone in the Black community, look for somebody who's been involved with like Rainbow Push, Jesse Jackson's movement. Look for folks at the NAACP, or for, older heads in Black Lives Matter, and keep turning out, follow them literally, if they're going to a protest, if they're going to a rally, if they've got a reading group, go and learn at their feet, and, show them that you're hungry, not just to get mad and loud, but to do this and be down for the fight for a long time.
For sure. I feel like we're so fixated, and just kind of boil down what you said a little bit more layman's terms, is we focus on the what and not the why, right? We focus so much on what the immediate thing that happened that got us emotional, that spurred our anger, but we don't figure out why. And if we never root out the why, that same problem is going to happen over and over and over again, because you're not addressing the root cause of it. And then furthermore, I feel like for allies, at least, that cancel culture can easily turn into performative, right? Because you cancel someone without actually addressing what let's say like a corporation fires somebody. That's a form of canceling. But they never actually rooted out the fact that maybe the way that the company is structured, the way that HR operates, the way that the culture of the company, where they will report a person of color to HR for speaking up and saying, oh, they were aggressive, made me feel scared. Well, if you don't address that, then you're kind of letting the company off the hook, because they said, oh, you fired that one person who said something problematic, then good, you guys are good in my book. So I feel as though right now it's like we have a really amazing moment in time where we've gotten people's attention. The Black Lives Matter, the Black community is by and large, whether people are listening to them, they've heard them, right? You can't say that you didn't hear about it. So going forward, as we have about 7 minutes left, we're Asian Americans. How do we continue to be allies to the Black community, right? How do we also, for me, I feel so many of us think it's zero sum, where it's either we're advocating for the Black Lives Matter movement or we're advocating for the Asian American community. But to me, it's not mutually exclusive at all. I believe it's intersectional. So how do we be allies going forward?
Man, I love that. I love exactly this idea of a zero-sum game, right? And I just think that that's stupid, because it's like the old proverb, right? Right? I mean, this is what it comes down to, is like, and again, I will go back to my what I was saying initially about, I think that we focus too much on the individual instantiations of racism and supremacy, and not enough on the bigger structure of what we're fighting, right? So, because we're actually not fighting anti-Asian racism, we're fighting supremacy and normativity, right? Same thing. I will even say, like, anti-Blackness is a form that imperialism and cultural normativity takes. And so, right, the more that we learn, the more that we advocate for Black folks, for women, for queer folks, for immigrants, the more that we understand our enemy, right? And the more that we destroy our enemy, right? And then vice versa, right? The more allies that we invite into and educate into what Orientalism looks like, right? How xenophobia against Asian Americans is really similar to xenophobia against Latino Americans, Latinx Americans, right? Exactly like I'm seeing in the comments, right? We're all, it's, these are not separate fights. These are all different fronts of the same war.
Yep.
And right, if you're in a war, how do you defeat a common enemy? You coordinate with other people who are fighting the same enemy, right? And so I think that it's bad strategy. It's not learning the right lessons. If we're saying, hey, we have our fight over here and it's different from your fight over here. Like, no, like if, you know, if we learn, if we work together to reduce systemic anti-Blackness, of course that is going to help our own, you know, fight against anti-Asian racism. But we have to really see that. I think we have to really understand that this is, you know, it's part of the myth of like the individual bad person, right? People talk about racism like it's like, oh, you know, that person just doesn't like Black people. That's fucked up. But it's a system that pushes Black people out, just like it's a system that pushes Asian people out, and so on and so forth. So once we understand that, you know, honestly, racism is not going to get better if we focus on making individual people better. You know, we got to do both. Like, of course, we got to love on individuals, but we've also got to call out the ways that the system works. And we can only do that if we have that bigger picture mentality. And I think as long as our vision remains small and remains local, we're actually going to keep making mistakes, right? Because you can't fight a system with like individual actions. You got to fight a system with a coordinated campaign.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, overall, as and people, I think in the chat understand this, and more, I think we're educating ourselves is that we need to change the system. It's not the individual people, right? Donald Trump is not eliminating Donald Trump is not going to fix problems, right? It's a much more deeply rooted issue than that. And so we have to come together. We have to strategize. And for me, I believe it's like a short, medium, and long-term plan, right? The short term is you got to first acknowledge the problems that are existed. We got to make sure that we are actually addressing it for what it is. We do have to call out anti-Blackness in the Asian American community. We do have to call out the fact that we have problematic people within our community. And we start healing and educating. And that way it shows and gives us credibility that we are ready to join the fight. And part of that is, you know, fighting for, you know, policy changes such as language access, right? Making sure money is earmarked for all communities of color. And there's just a lot. I believe that we have a lot more work to do, but at the end of the day, I think that we are really starting to come together. And so we have just a few minutes left, Jason. If there was anything, you know, that you really wanted to kind of leave here, if there was any statement or a call to action, now's the time.
Yeah, man. I mean, you know, going back to sort of our jumping off point for this, you know, anyone who's in here, please, you know, learn and know and love your history, you know, so that definitely comes to, you know, the history of, you know, Native Americans, right? Which to me includes a lot of the history of, you know, you look at Hispanic and Latinx folks in Central and even North and South America. That includes definitely an understanding of the generationality of Black struggle, you know, going back and understanding that, you know, this is all Black Lives Matter is another wave of the fight against segregation. It's another wave of the fight, you know, for integration, for all these things. And then for Asian Americans, know our history, right? There's an incredible actually amount of stuff out there. Look up this book called The Making of Asian America. Look up Kathy Park Hong's Minor Feelings. Look up Gary Okihiro's Third World Studies, Theorizing Liberation. You know, really, 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 please just search for Asian American history, because what you're going to discover is all of the conversations, like, you know, this little hour that we've had together, any conversations that we're having today have been had for at least 50 to 100 to 120, 150 years. There's some incredible readings that I've been doing from the 70s. So the more you dive into that history, the more you're going to realize, wow, we have mentors and ancestors that we don't even know of who are telling us, giving us game on what to do, and it just gets erased. So our way of fighting that erasure, fighting that marginalization, is by doing our research. So please do that research. Stay tuned. On my Instagram, on Hate is a Virus Instagram. Sam, I know on your IG, like, we're always trying to put out these crumbs, trying to put out this knowledge into the community. So please just do that research and keep people around you who are also aware of that bigger picture.
For sure, and I appreciate you for doing this, Jason. The way you said it so eloquently and from a place of love, and also I got a couple quick call to actions. Right, we got number one. I want to shout out the work that Next Shark and Admirasia are doing. They have a map where you can find Black-owned businesses, Asian-owned businesses, so you can support, because those small businesses have been absolutely decimated due to COVID. And we're already struggling beforehand, right? So let's make sure we keep the money in our communities, that we're uplifting those in our community, and putting our money where our mouth is. Now, the second call to action is also at the end of this month. All these Real Talk Tuesdays are really leading up to our big event, which is the Raise a Million event. So please donate, do anything you can. I understand times are hard right now. I know that people are struggling, but the money that we're raising is to go directly back into the community. And so we want to put our money where your mouth is, right? Because talk is cheap. Talk is important in terms of creating dialogue, but ultimately at the end of the day, results matter. Result matters, action talks. And for everyone that is out there, keep fighting the good fight, keep educating yourself. It's a marathon, not a race, but doesn't mean, and it's just like war. You got to treat it like war. Sometimes you get tired. That means you're going to have to go to the infirmary. You're going to go have to patch yourself up, but you're going in with the intention of coming back out so you can keep fighting the good fight. And this fight is not over. It's going to be everlasting. We're going to keep having to dismantle these systems of oppression for a long, long time. But I truly believe this, and I believe I speak for Jason as well, and the whole HATEISAVIRUS community, that if we work together, when we work together, that we will absolutely prevail. And so with that being said, thank you so much, everybody, for joining. Please join us for our next talk in a few weeks. Please go follow Jason Chu Music. His music is fire. It is dope. It is amazing. I listen to that shit every single day. It gets me up in the morning. Honor, honestly, is probably my favorite songs right now. I just keep on listening to it over and over again. Please follow Hate is a Virus. And if you feel like following me too, I'd love that as well. So with that being said, everybody, thank you. Much love. Hang in there. Keep fighting. And until next time.
Hey, peace, y'all.
Later, Jason.